In this section, we covered 4 different chapters. Chapter 4 was over audience adaptation and credibility. Audience analysis. You must know your audience. To be able to efficiently convey your speech, you need to know who you're speaking to and appeal to them. If you're speaking to people who have different views than you need to alter your speech to actually appeal to them. Within that, there's demographics. Gender, age, income, and even race are different demographics you should consider within giving your speech. If you're speaking to an age group that is well above yours, you might need to alter your speech to appeal to their different ways of thinking than you, because different age groups tend to have different ways of thinking, as they were raised in different generations than different age groups. Along with this, there's situational audience analysis. The size of your audience, the physical location, and even the setting all have a factor in this. If you're speaking to an audience that is a huge auditorium with maybe 500 people, you should deliver your speech differently than if it was an audience of maybe 5 people, as your speech may be more intimate in that setting. Along with this is disposition. If you're bored sounding about your speech, your audience is most likely not going to be any more enthusiastic than you are. The audience will feed off of your energy about what you're speaking on and maybe become more interested. If you start off sounding bored about what you're talking about, your audience is most likely going to feel the same way and not share enthusiasm. Along with this, moving to chapter 5, you must prepare and organize your speech. Know your purpose, which is your why. Know what your topic is, as obviously being the what, and your central idea. What's the point of what you're saying? You must have a central point to drive home rather than just random thoughts getting at the same topic. Your organization is pivotal in actually relaying your speech efficiently. Your introduction and conclusion are also vital. You want to start strong and end strong. You only get to make one first impression on your audience, and this is your introduction. This needs to start out strong to set the tone for the rest of your speech. And obviously in your conclusion, you want to end strong. People tend to remember most the first thing and the last thing they heard, so your introduction and conclusion are definitely important parts of your speech. Along with this, moving to chapter 6, you need to outline your speech. Make yourself an outline so you know what you're going to talk about as your main points, in what order you're going to speak on them, and even the examples you're going to use to support them. This will make it easier for your speech to flow efficiently once you actually get up to do it. If you just have ideas floating around in your head, you're not going to have a clear wave of thinking, and it won't come across as easily to your audience, and they may not even be able to follow what you're talking about. You should have your own outline, and along with this, you should have your speaking outline. This is something like note cards that you can have during your speech that remind you what you're going to talk about next. This should be short and to the point, and even shorthand, just so you can have something to trigger your memory to know what you're talking about next. Your audience outline, however, is much different. This should be much more thorough and written in a way that somebody who has no idea about your speech can still understand what you're talking about. This is for them to follow along with you. So you want it to be thorough just as you're speaking on, so they can actually understand what you're talking about. This is your formal outline for the audience. Chapter 7 covered supporting your speech. This is gathering information and research. You can gather information from areas such as libraries to databases to credible websites and also books. Evaluate your research. Make sure it's recent and actually with the times, and also consider sponsorship and authorship. Sponsorship are the people that are supporting this credible, and authorship is the person who wrote this a credible source. You want to make sure they are before you use their information to support your speech, as you want your speech and information to be strong. With interviews, you need to know what the reason you're doing the interview is, who is doing the interview, and if you should record it or not. These are all things that you should consider. Make sure you know going in what you're going to ask, and avoid using questions that are considered leading questions. You want your interviewee to give clear and information that is just from them. You don't want bias from your questions having influence on the interview. Support your ideas within the speech. You can use examples, statistics, and testimonies for this. For example, you want your examples to be strong and clear and to your point. You want them to support your point, not be confusing and misleading for your point. Testimonies can be a form of example, and personal testimonies of your own can also be a very strong piece to use. Statistics are another good point, as numbers tend to make a point much more clear since you can't argue with numbers. Just make sure these numbers are actually recent and credible and accurate to what you're talking about. Citing your sources is also very important. You can't use all this information that's not your own without citing it. You need to have the author's name, the date, any other info that's pivotal, and the book or website that you got it from. Anything also being the sponsoring organization should be included. With that, something I didn't know in this chapter that was important is to consider interviews as much as it was relayed in the chapter. I didn't know that there was as much emphasis on this in supporting a speech. While this is a big area of speeches that can be used for sure. Ways to relate this to other areas of our lives is, even when you're writing other papers, you still want to use citing. You still want to cite your sources even if you're doing a history paper. This is no different. Your speeches also need to be cited just as if you would write a history paper or a science paper about where you got your information. In that science paper, you would have to cite your sources and give credit to those scientists. Your speeches for public speaking are no different. You want to make sure your sources are cited properly. That's a good rundown of what we covered in chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7.